My grandfather was a fighter pilot. Although he was always a little distant, I liked him. When I grew up, I noticed that he was always on the alert, always looking for any sign of danger, post-traumatic, stress disorder, shell shock, has several names. My mother told me that he was not like that before he changed. When he returned from Vietnam, my grandfather's career was probably the reason I became obsessed with space astronauts, airplanes, and pilots. We used to talk about it when we were together, so he was a high-ranking man in the military, and he knew a few people, even a couple of famous astronauts. I once asked him if he knew anyone who had been to the moon, and he replied, "Don't talk to me about the moon boy. It's a dark and dangerous place." He died in 2004 of natural causes. 2 months ago, we decided to renovate the old flight house. While I was cleaning the attic, I found a metal box inside. There were several things that I assumed were my grandfather's. There was a military medal, a bunch of papers, and an old photo of him with 2 other men I didn't recognize. My grandfather looked to be about 40 years old. So I figured the photo was taken in the 70s. Everyone was wearing suits, and the background was the typical one used by NASA, but without the logo. There was just a plain white background. The mission patch said Downbreaker. I didn't understand anything. My grandfather was an astronaut because he never mentioned Downbreaker. What mission was that I had never heard of? It seemed to be. But why did I find the answers in the papers at the bottom of the box below? I will rewrite the verbatim content, but I warn that some people might find it disturbing, my dear family. If you ever find this, I must confess to you something in 1972. I was not in Vietnam. I was not supposed to tell anyone. But if you have found this, it doesn't matter anymore. In 1965, a small group of pilots, including myself, were selected for a secret team of astronauts who would fly covert missions in space for our government. We would not have the glory or fame of normal astronauts, but our country needed us, and so we did it. In early 1972, we were informed that for a time, our country had had a secret satellite orbiting the moon. We were never told what it was for, or why it was there. Only that a few weeks earlier it had crashed on the dark side of the moon for unknown reasons, and that the data it carried was crucial. The government needed to recover it. That is why they sent me and 2 other astronauts to recover the satellite's memory module. Basically, they gave us the equipment that would be used on the Apollo 18 mission. We were told that the Apollo team was furious, and would not I blamed them. It seemed like we were under the orders of someone more powerful than NASA. Obviously, everything was top secret. Officially, I was sent to Vietnam, but in reality, we spent months training for the mission after a lot of training. We were on the launch pad, in front of a gigantic rocket that would take us to the moon. I was the commander, while Lieutenant Carver was the pilot of the lunar module. Lem and Lieutenant Ackerman was the pilot of the command and service module. The flight to the moon took about 3 days. Upon arrival, we orbited a couple of times. Every time we passed behind the moon, I felt a small feeling of helplessness when communication with the Earth was cut off due to the mass of the moon. The hidden side of the moon was very different from the one we see from the Earth. Instead of gray fields and calm seas, it was covered with deep, dark craters, as if it were being devoured by the same universe. Finally, it was decided that it was time to descend to the surface. Carver and I said goodbye to Ackerman, and in the lunar module called Karen, we separated from the one called Trinidad. After announcing Karen has landed, the response was not of applause or celebration, just a simple, "Hear, hear." Trinidad, "Congratulations, Karen. I will transmit the news. Be careful down there, friends," so we were completely isolated from the rest of the world. Ackerman was our only connection. While he was on the visible side of the moon, he could communicate with mission control, and when he orbited over the hidden side, he could communicate with us, but never with both at the same time. Although the orbit of the lasted about 2 hours, we would only have about 35 minutes of contact in each lap. We landed on a plain inside a huge crater. Contrary to what many believe, the sun also illuminates the hidden side of the moon, just like the visible one. Depending on the phase lunar where we landed, it was still light, but we knew it would get dark. In a few days, I was excited and curious about what we would find in that world. Music alien, we waited an hour and a half until Ackerman contacted us, and we spent that time preparing our suits. Mission control sends you. Congratulations. Proceed with the recovery. Everything was complete, silently as I stepped onto the surface of the moon. I tried to think of something inspiring to say, but those times had already passed. With Carver, we got on the rover, and after planting our flag next to the ship, we set off. As we crossed the surface, I saw what looked like a flash, like a shine, reflected by something metallic in the distance, as it was common to see flashes of light due to a physical phenomenon caused by space radiation that affects the eyes. I didn't give it much importance and forgot about it. Soon after driving for a couple of hours, we reached the satellite, or what was left of it. We quickly realized that something was not right. There were dozens of footprints around the probe, leading towards 2 long marks that dragged in the distance. "What the hell is this?" asked Carver, surprised. "I don't know, but it seems that someone went ahead and took what we came to search." I answered the footprints, and footprints were different from ours. Whoever took the data was not here under the flag of the United States. As expected, we did not find the data box. We found the place where it was supposed to be, but it was no longer. Luckily, we had established contact with Ackerman, so we informed him of what we had discovered. "This makes no sense. Who could have taken it? The Russians do not even have a lunar program, and even if they did, how come we did not realize how they could land on the moon without us knowing it?" He answered, "As far as we know, the Russians have no idea we are here." Said Carver over the radio, "We are going to follow the footprints." I interrupted the conversation. "Are you sure of that?" he asked Ackerman. "I am not sure of anything. Something is getting away from us, but I will follow your order, Captain," answered Carver. Yes, that data was so important that they send people here to get them back. We need to know what happened. Understood, Karen, as soon as I can. I will inform command about their position. Be careful." Our oxygen was at half, but we continued forward in the hopes of solving this mystery. It wasn't long until I saw something in the distance as we got closer. I realized the design was different from ours, and it was decorated with a Soviet flag. There was something really strange about that ship. If the Russians were here with us, they would have picked up our transmissions, so it didn't make sense for them to hide. The unidentified Soviet ship here. The crew of the Downbreaker, please respond. We know they are here. We have them in sight. Silence. We tried to communicate several times in Russian and in English, but there was no response. As we got closer, I realized why the ship seemed so strange to me. It seemed like it had been there for a long time. We couldn't see much through the small windows that were covered with something. Since the inside, we're running out of air, Miller. And I don't like this. We should go back. I know. But we have to find out what's going on here. It took us a while to open the airlock of the ship. There was no one inside. The place was a mess with stains of a reddish-brown liquid everywhere, probably from some food package, torn, or was it? No, I quickly got that idea out of my head. It was a two-person ship. We found some supplies and samples, but nothing from the black box of the satellite. There was a spacesuit hanging near the airlock. The tag with the name was clearly missing. We both realized that the other must still be out there by now. Our oxygen was very low, so we hurried back to our ship. When we got to Charon with the last remnants of oxygen, I noticed something. Tell me, Carver. We passed by the satellite on the way back. Be it don't mention it. It wasn't there later. We shared our discovery with Ackerman, and he was as surprised as the command when he reported it. That night I stood watch for the first few hours. Although it was still daylight, we called night the time we rested. When it was finally my turn to sleep, I dreamed of the flash I had seen the day before. I walked until I found the same spacesuit from the Russian ship lying in the dust. The limbs were twisted in horrible ways, but it was clear that someone, or something, was inside. I walked over and slowly opened the visor of the helmet. I looked in horror. It was my face covered in dried blood instead of eyes. There were only 2 empty holes. The next day we picked up something on an unused channel on the radio. It was a weak signal coming from somewhere in the crater. We plugged it into the speakers, but it didn't make sense. It was a repetitive sound, like someone vocalizing a single letter or vowel for a few seconds, followed by a pause, and then the same thing. Sound. Although slightly different after eating for another moonwalk, it was darker than the day before. We followed the source of the signal for an hour until we saw something in the dust. I tensed up as I got closer and saw what it was. It was a spacesuit, the same as the one, the Russian ship. Well, it seems we found our lost friend, said Carver in disbelief. I said nothing. I just got off the rover and silently approached the suit. What are you doing? Miller asked Carver just as I was about to open the visor with my shaking hands. The suit came to life, and he grabbed my hand through our suits. I heard a faint knock, meaning help in Russian. We took him to our ship. The patch on his suit said Tarkov was in shock and lacking oxygen. I don't know how long he had been lying there, but he was lucky to survive for the next few hours. He went in and out of consciousness. He finally woke up. Our Russian was bad, but he spoke enough English to understand us or to why he was there. Or what happened to his crew. When I looked out the window, I noticed that our flag had disappeared. There were no footprints. It had simply vanished in that moment. Each of us was really scared, and we asked to end the mission. The command refused, insisting that recovering the satellite data was vital. We decided to continue the search the next day and went to sleep. I had the same nightmare again as the day before. I woke up, sweating and terrified. I saw Tarkov standing looking out the window. Then he walked to where Carver was sleeping and stayed watching him for a couple of minutes. In a low voice, I asked him, "Tarkov, what are you doing?" But he just muttered something and went to bed. I didn't sleep the rest of the night, keeping an eye on him, but nothing happened. But the next day we found a photo or a map of the crater we were in one of the pockets of Tarkov's suit. There was a point marked with a cross a few kilometers away. Tarkov didn't know what was there, but I realized it was in the direction I had seen the flash the first day we had. That investigate it later, Carver and I set off for that point, while Tarkov stayed on the ship. Although the Robert had enough power to carry the three of us, I insisted that it wasn't, and that he should stay behind. I don't trust that guy. I told Carver, making sure that Tarkov was out of our radio range. We landed on the moon. We found the box, and suddenly the probe disappears. Then we find a Russian who was supposedly dead without remembering anything. And now we are going to a place that appears on his map, but he doesn't know why. Of course, I don't trust him. In fact, I don't trust a single step in that direction, replied Carver. What will we do with him? I don't know, but we can't take him with us neither. The Lem nor he are made for 3 people. You know that, and he knows it too. The sun was starting to set after a while driving. We arrived at something that still puzzles me. In front of us was a structure that I can only describe as a 3-sided pyramid. It was about 3 meters high, and its surface was completely smooth and black as night. "What the hell is this?" asked Carver with a shiver in. The voice. We walked around the pyramid and took pictures. What the heck, I suddenly heard on the radio. I turned and saw Carver frozen, looking at something about 6 meters away from us in the dim light. Was a spacesuit. I recognized the patch. No name. It was the same suit from the Russian ship. It was standing but empty when I saw it. A crackling noise. "You belong here," said a low voice. Distorted, suddenly a flash blinded me, and when I recovered, the suit had disappeared. "Carver, are you okay?" I asked him at first. He did not answer. Then he said to NASA, "To this mission. I want to get out of here now without arguing." We ran back to the rover, and we returned to the ship. When we arrived, the sun had already set, and everything was dark. The airlock was open, and Tarkov, with his suit on, was standing in front of the ship. Damn, we had forgotten about him. I went over. "Listen, Tarkov." There is something. I stopped when I saw that he was carrying something on his back. It was too late. He lunged at me and hit me with a sharp bar. I hit my head with my helmet and fell stunned when I could react. I saw Tarkov fighting with Carver in the dust. I got up and threw myself at him, pushing her back up. He was already on top of me. Struggles, and when he tried to take off my helmet, I hit him with a rock. His visor cracked, and as the air escaped from his suit, I stabbed him in the chest. He collapsed on top of me, and when our helmets touched, he muttered with his last breath, "It is not your friend," is following the voice. I got up and ran to Carver. His suit was punctured in the leg and bled a lot. I managed to stop the bleeding but needed proper treatment. Take off in that state. Could there be a first aid kit on the Russian ship? No, yes. I answered, "Miller, you have to go look for him. It's not that far. It's okay, but hold on. Until I get back." I told him, I quickly went to the Russian ship. The way was distressing, waiting for something to jump out of the darkness at any moment. I was not surprised that the suit that was previously hanging on the wall, but it still gave me chills. I took the first aid kit and ran back, but Tarkov's words kept resonating in my head. "He is not your friend. Follow the voice," he repeated constantly. Then I changed the channel on the radio and heard the strange noise again. It was louder in one direction. Follow the voice, I said to myself, was this. The voice that Tarkov was referring to, who was not my friend. Tarkov Carver, the commander on Earth. I had to discover him. I drove in the direction of the signal after about 15 minutes. I arrived at a small crater, about 10 meters in diameter, with the headlight on. I saw something inside, but I could not recognize it immediately. I approached the edge. I entered the crater and turned on the light. To the maximum, I was paralyzed with terror for what seemed like hours in the center of the crater. There was a rectangular block of the same material that the pyramid above him lay a body, with its limbs contorted in a frightening manner. Its eyes were missing, and in their place there were only two huge holes. It was Carver. He had a small box in his mouth, the black box from the satellite. I took it and ran out as fast as I could. Carver was dead. Yes, Carver was dead. Who was the Carver that I left on the ship? "He is not your friend," was the only thing I thought about. The whole way back when I arrived, Tarkov's body had disappeared, but Carver was still there, bleeding. But he was no longer Carver. What was that thing? "Thank God you came back." Miller said Carver, but he was not Carver. Carver was dead, mutilated. "Dead are you, Carver?" "Yes, I have the first aid kit," I answered, pretending I did not know what I knew. He could not suspect that I knew I treated his wound and stopped the bleeding. I tied him up and then tied myself. I didn't tell him I had found the black box. I didn't say anything. The engine roared as the Karen split in two, and the crew module pushed us into the void, leaving the legs of the module planted forever in the lunar dust. I mentioned before that I felt the minutes as if they were hours. The ascent and the encounter lasted just over a dozen minutes, but they seemed like decades. I wanted to scream until I broke my lungs. I wanted to vomit, but I couldn't. If I did, he would know I wanted to faint. But I had to save Ackerman. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, we docked with Ackerman and the Trinity. We had kept him informed, but seeing him was different. He was scared, but I was more. He didn't know that Carver was not Carver. I did untie myself first, and pushed out of the tunnel from docking, kicked to Carver. Or not. Carver in the face when he tried to follow me. I closed the docking tunnel behind me. "What the hell are you doing, Miller?" "You're crazy." Ackerman yelled as he slammed me into the wall of the module. "Don't open it." "Mike, it's not Carver. That thing in the L, it's not Carver." I screamed in pain. "Ackerman." A hardened soldier finally burst into tears. I floated past him, and before undocking the Karen, I looked one last time out the window of the tunnel. There was that thing with Carver's face and body, but it wasn't. He was staring at us. Fixed, his eyes were completely smooth and black. As the night, he opened his mouth in a way impossible for a human being, and let out a screech so loud and disturbing that I still wish I could forget in an instant. Silence fell as the Karen broke away from and went into the void, Ackerman. And I didn't say a word. During the 3 days that the trip back to Earth lasted, we were quarantined for months when we returned. No one explained to us what happened on the mission. I never knew what was in the black box, and honestly, I didn't want to know. Apparently, what they found was enough to cancel all the missions to the moon and beyond. They set us free, but they made it very clear that we should never speak of this. I never saw Ackerman again. The only time I spoke of him was when a couple of years later 2 suited men came to my house. Captain Miller has been in contact with Lieutenant Ackerman lately. One of them asked after the greetings. No, I haven't heard from him since the mission. Why? I answered. I'm sorry to inform you that yesterday I found Lieutenant Ackerman dead in a nearby forest. I collapsed. I didn't know him either, but we had spent enough time together in training and lived through hell. The mission to consider him a poor friend, Mike. How he died, I asked. We still don't know, but he had multiple fractures in all his limbs and his eyes had been gouged out.